The topic of today's video is the sacred marriage covenant, what God is doing together. It is based off of the verse in the New Testament, what God is doing together, let no one separate. These are the words that Yeshua spoke to the Pharisees who were challenging him about their way of understanding marriage. They had asked Yeshua if it was okay for a man to divorce his wife. And Yeshua would ask them, well, what does the Bible say? And they said, well, Moses permitted us to divorce her for any and every reason. And Yeshua said, well, from the beginning, it wasn't so. God made them one flesh, and what God is doing together, let no one separate. When God created marriage, he created marriage to reunite a man and a woman to become one flesh so that they could live in a covenant. And God never intended for divorce to enter the marital union, but as he said to the Pharisees, and as we know today, because the human heart is hard, because we experience so many struggles and trials and tribulations in life, and definitely in marriage, that Moses, thousands of years later, gave a way out for marriages that were problematic for whatever reason. But God never intended for divorce to be a part of the marriage covenant, but therein lies a distinction. What makes a marriage a covenant? What makes a marriage a covenant versus a legal contract? What God is doing together, let no one separate, is often spoken during a Christian wedding ceremony by the clergy official who's conducting the ceremony. And the Christian couple often stands under this declaration without truly considering whether the marital relationship that they're entering in can bear the burden of this declaration, because it carries a lot of weight, it carries a lot of authority, it carries a lot of expectations. So I think that if we entered marriage and before we said vows, we considered what we were saying, we would have to first ask ourselves, and I think definitely before we got to the wedding ceremony, but even before we got engaged, before we even started dating a person, we would have to ask God and ask ourselves some questions. We would ask ourselves, do we know whether God approves of our relationship? Have we even asked God if he approves of our dating, getting engaged, and getting married? And will we be entering into marriage under a covenant, a spiritual covenant established by God under what God is doing together, let no one separate? Or will we be entering our marriage under just a legal contract that the government issued by a marriage certificate, so that if we choose to get him and go, all we have to do is sign the dotted line and it's over? Those are very different relationships. And again, I think that we need to really understand what the marriage covenant is, so that when we do get married, we enter it under the right authority of God and for the right reasons, and of course with his approval. This is important before we get married, not after. Oftentimes what happens to us is that we enter marriage, we're happy, we're in love, and then life hits. Circumstances come at us from the left and the right. We are challenged by the people and the temptations in the world. And then we start running to God, asking him to help us. We start praying, we start going to church, we do a lot of things. But we're inviting him into a relationship after we've already determined that we wanted something. And that's so often what we do as human beings, as Christians even. We get into trouble and we start calling out to God and asking him to fix something, but we didn't invite him in from the beginning.